evening, everybody. Welcome back to Exploring the Lord of the Rings. I'm Corey Olson. This is session number 144 of Exploring the Lord of the Rings. We finally equal one gross today, which is pretty exciting, I think. Fairly awesome. And session number 20, I believe, if I'm counting correctly, on the Council of Elrond. So today we no, JJ, that's not the number of people who have been invited to the stream. You don't have to worry that you've been asked to fill up the required number like goods in a package or anything like that. So anyway, good. So let's well, in a second we'll jump into the text. One very quick announcement is don't forget that this coming week we are starting our first term of our new Signum Path classes. So our June classes begin on this coming week, starting on Monday. But there's still time to register. These are short classes. They only go for 1 month each. So there's, of course, we have also a registration open for our July and our August classes, but there is still time to get in for June. So I just wanted to invite people to do that. We've had several registrations here in the last couple of days, which has been great. Anyway, just wanted to invite you to that, path.signumuniversity.org. All right. So let us get back into the text, because we were finally at Gandalf's speech here. So we're going to be doing a bunch more Gandalf this time. And I was particularly excited by our discussion last time when we were talking about Saruman's words, or rather Gandalf's recollection of Saruman's words, and particularly looking at the potential significance of his use of the passive voice about how the river was rolled down the river to the sea. Trying to understand there exactly in what way, like what precisely was the argument that Saruman was using to try to reassure the rest of the council, and that he was not necessarily attempting to bamboozle everyone into believing that it is something that is not only conceivable but overwhelmingly likely that the ring would have rolled spontaneously down the riverbed for hundreds of miles until it reached the ocean, which seems at best not the likeliest thing that would possibly have happened, under the course of nature, right? But again, that seems to me not what he is implying. But I think the reason that it took me a long time to come to that conclusion about that passage is that Gandalf is once again being very indirect. And this is very Gandalf, right? Gandalf almost never speaks directly about the powers in the West or about Iluvatar, right? I mean, he never says a straight word about them if he can get away with any kind of circumlocution, right? And it seems, anyway, either Saruman was equally circumlocutionary, or Gandalf is being indirect in his recalling of the thing. Yeah, Torlonio, I am also sure Gandalf was being was putting it as plainly as he possibly could, right? Which, as we've seen before, is none too plain in that case. So anyhow, yeah. So let's get back to his immediate follow-up. We actually glanced ahead at this passage already last time, but I want to kind of sit down with it here a little bit more. Gandalf fell silent, gazing eastward from the porch to the far peaks of the Misty Mountains, at whose great roots the peril of the world had so long lain hidden. He sighed. "There I was at fault," he said. "I was lulled by the words of Saruman the Wise, but I should have sought for the truth sooner, and our peril would now be less." "We were all at fault," said Elrond, "and but for your vigilance the darkness, maybe, would already be upon us. But say on." "From the first my heart misgave me, against all reason that I knew," said Gandalf, "and I desired to know how this thing came to Gollum, and how long he had possessed it. So I set a watch for him, guessing that he would ere long come forth from his darkness to seek for his treasure. He came, but he escaped and was not found. And then, alas, I let the matter rest, watching and waiting only, as we have too often done." Okay. Yeah, Matt is wondering if, given all the passive voice, if the Astari are bound to some kind of silence. I mean, Matt, Gandalf's pattern of indirection in his speaking about the West is almost enough to make me wonder whether or not there's been some kind of binding, some kind of vow. I don't know. You know, I'm not even sure. But I mean, I don't feel like we have enough evidence to answer that question. Yes, right, to answer that question positively. But we have enough data to like ask the question, I think. I don't really know. Yeah. Chris says that this exchange between Gandalf and Elrond has the sound of a discussion repeated, and I completely agree with you there. I think this is not the first time that Elrond has reassured Gandalf on this particular point. Okay, so first question I want to ask, though. That first paragraph. Why do we get that first paragraph? That first paragraph is quite unusual. I mean, in the Council of Elrond so far. We've gotten very little of this. Very little in the way of description of silence or dramatic pauses, right? Gandalf fell silent, gazing eastward from the porch to the far peaks of the Misty Mountains, at whose great roots the peril of the world had so long lain hidden. He sighed. Why do we get this description of Gandalf not only sighing, right, but of falling silent, gazing eastward, and looking at the Misty Mountains? On the one hand, I think that we have, his gazing at the Misty Mountains is sort of clear enough. I think there's the kind of, he is feeling the kind of irony here. I mean, it was right there, right? I mean, it's like they can see the mountains where it was. If they could see straight through the mountains, it's, I mean, like in a straight line, the Ring of Power was not very far from them for quite some time, right? And so there's certainly one of those like retrospective irony kinds of things, right, that he's reflecting on, at whose great roots the peril of the world had so long lain hidden. But I wonder, right, I wonder. Yeah, now, Chris, I agree with that. If you're a first-time reader who had read The Hobbit, this might serve as connecting tissue between the stories. That's certainly true. Here's the other thing, and I certainly agree, JJ, that it is, it does help us feel the weight of his words, of Gandalf's words. And also just to bring home to us Gandalf's own feelings in this matter, right? He's not just reporting. This is not just Gandalf, making a presentation to this group of people, right? These things Gandalf feels rather keenly, right? He genuinely seems to believe that he was at fault, that he blew this, right? And this is, again, another one of those things that I think doesn't get emphasized often enough when people ask the question. I know I've brought this up a couple times in the last few weeks, but I do so because it's one of those things of, after 10 years of, being on the internet fielding people's Tolkien questions, you see a lot of patterns in questions. And one of the patterns that I have seen many times are people who, and these are like, smart, intelligent readers, who are saying, like, doesn't it seem like a slip on Tolkien's part, that, or like a, an imperfect, at the very least, an imperfect success in his retconning, to have Gandalf not figure it out sooner, right? But one of the things that is often overlooked in that is that, Gandalf would be the first to agree with people who feel that way, right? If you feel like, well, gosh, it's unlike Gandalf not to have put things together there. Well, yes, Gandalf does feel regret about that. And Gilgalmthir, I think that's perfectly fair to say that we rarely see Gandalf looking this vulnerable and fallible. I agree. Certainly in The Lord of the Rings. In The Hobbit, we saw him both vulnerable and fallible, though in different ways, right? vulnerable in the I'm stuck up a tree and about to get eaten by wolves kind of way, right? Which is a different kind of vulnerability than this one. But anyway, yes, I do agree. And Tony, I agree also that this is definitely part of Gandalf's incarnation, his forgetting things and making mistakes. This is part of the story, part of his story, right? That I do think we are supposed to receive here. And certainly, again, this pause serves to help us to make that connection, right? To realize that. Again, this is not just... Gandalf is not just giving us the facts here, right? He is being vulnerable here. We are being shown from the outside that he feels very strongly about this stuff. But I wonder. Well, let's talk about. We finish talking about this a little bit more. But I have another question to ask about it. Enoch says, is it possible that Gandalf feels his failure so strongly and takes it so personally because the Astari were the ones actually charged with opposing Sauron? Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly a sort of like a failure, you know, that of like his brief more directly, right? I mean, it's his job, right? So if the Ring of Power was right there and, you know, and he didn't pick up on it and he should have picked up on it, I mean, this seems to have been served up to him on a plate potentially, right? And he missed it. He blew it. Had he figured this out 200 years earlier, 300 years earlier, had they figured out that had they somehow discovered that the Ring of Power was there, right, in the Misty Mountains, wow, that would have made things much easier, right? But had Gandalf even figured it out 75 years before, right after Bilbo's adventure, they could have swung south, right, gone to the fiery mountain, chucked it in, and gone home, right? Now, it wouldn't necessarily have been that easy, but still probably easier than right about now. Anyway, but here's the other thing. Yeah, Balangsman, that's one of the other things that I'm thinking about, is that I also don't want to go over the top in thinking about that way, that he is sighing, he is feeling it, but I am not necessarily convinced that this is 100% a just an emotional moment on Gandalf's part, right? Yes, he's appearing vulnerable, but I think there might be more involved here. He's gazing eastward to the far peaks of the Misty Mountains, at whose great roots the peril of the world had so long lain hidden. And that's when he's sighing. I'm wondering, in part, if what he's doing there, in trying to play what exactly is going through Gandalf's mind while he's doing this, while he's looking at the mountains. In playing that game, it's possible that he is dwelling on his own failure, perceived failure, right? I should have figured it out sooner. I was at fault for this. It's possible, but I'm not 100% sure that that's all that he's doing. There are a couple other things that he could be thinking here. WKU, it's quite possible he could be thinking about Gollum, right? He's looking at the Misty Mountains. Now, I just said a couple minutes ago that, oh, man, if they'd figured out that the ring was there 300 years ago, right, then, wow, this would have been a lot easier, right? And that's true. But how on earth would they have, right? Remember back to that other cryptic remark which Gandalf claimed to be being as plain about it as was possible, right? Gandalf himself was explaining to Frodo that the finding of the ring by Bilbo in that moment was orchestrated by some power who wanted Bilbo to find the ring and not by its owner, right? And so if we're following his train of logic, it seems that Gandalf is believing there, is explaining to Frodo that the good guys, whether it was Iluvatar, whether it was one of the Valar, or all of the Valar, or what, whoever it was, wanted that to happen, right? That Providence took a hand and meant for it to happen this way. And so, is he, therefore, looking at the Misty Mountains and saying, gosh, if only we'd found it earlier? How could they have? It's not just a question of like, well, be realistic. What were you going to do? Comb through the whole mountains looking? Why would they look for it in the mountains, right? And how could they possibly have known? It's not even that, right? It's not even the mere impossibility of it. It is the fact that he has positive evidence that, or at least he has a positive conviction, let me say, that they found it when they were meant to find it, right? That it's lying, the peril of the world lying hidden at the great roots of the Misty Mountains at which he's looking when he's thinking right now, that's where the ring, in a sense, was meant to be, right? So I wonder, his words talk about his being at fault, and what he should have done and how he could have handled things better. But I'm not sure that that's actually what his thoughts are lingering on in that moment. I'm kind of wondering if what he's thinking about is kind of contemplating the shape of things, if that makes sense, right? Not thinking about the past there, but thinking about the future. Trying to understand the story that he is a part of, right? And again, remember, this comes right after he quoted Saruman saying, if I'm understanding him correctly, Saruman saying, or at least implying in that Istari-like indirect way, that the Lords of the West, the Valar, and or Iluvatar, right, have taken care of it. That was Saruman's reassurance. It has been rolled down the river to the sea, right? Almost got it. It sleeps with the Silmarils. Don't worry about it. And if that was what he was just quoting Saruman saying, so he was just quoting and is now maybe reflecting on Saruman's argument, the Valar have this, right? What's the truth? That turned out to be a lie, right? That's not the truth. He might have earnestly studied this matter, but that was not, in fact, the conclusion of his studies, that the Lords of the West have taken care of it, right? Except, wait, they kind of did, actually, right? Gandalf himself seems to believe that Providence itself has indeed taken care of the ring, except it didn't send it down to the sea. It hid it in the mountains, right? The concealment of the peril of the world at the great roots of the Misty Mountains for all of those years, that was the contrivance of the powers, not the rolling down to the sea. Instead, they revealed it, right? Ultimately to Gollum, and it was hidden. And then it was revealed to Bilbo. And now it's come to them here and now. And so he is, I think, perhaps looking forward, right? And thinking, so what does this mean? What is the council of the West in this hour? If we're in fact following their plan, right? Their big plan, then what's the plan exactly, right? How should we go forward with that plan? And you see, I think it fits with what he says. For his mind to be going in that direction seems to me to work with what he says right afterwards too. There I was at fault. I was lulled by the words of Saruman the Wise. But I should have sought for the truth sooner, and our peril would now be less. What did he do wrong? He was lulled by the words of Saruman the Wise, who told him, here's what the plan of the West is. The plan of the West is to take the ring away from Middle-earth and to hide it forever from Sauron. And one of the things that I think he's saying here is, dude, I should have known that that was not the plan of the Lords of the West. Not that they haven't taken a hand. Not that they're not looking, into this. Not that they're not taking a role. but rather that that's not the role that they would take. And I should have known that, right? I was lulled by Saruman's words. I kind of wanted to hear that. I liked the idea. We all liked the idea that the Valar had said, we got this. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. We've taken care of the enemy's ring. You don't have to, trouble yourself about that. But he should have known. He should have known, not because he should have known that they wouldn't take a hand, but that that's not the way in which they would take a hand. And nobody should know that better than he, right? Because he's a big part of the hand that they're taking in this whole thing, right? Yeah, Tony, they would want it destroyed for good, not hidden for a season, but I think even more importantly, they wouldn't take it out of the hands of the people of Middle-earth, right? They're going to leave it for the doom of this council and the deeds and the great deeds to follow. That's how they operate, right? Sweeping in and taking the issue out of the hands of the peoples of Middle-earth, that's not the way it generally goes. Yeah. Now, Sam, you're absolutely right. They did kind of take it from Gollum, in a sense. Sure, absolutely. No, that's not what I mean. When I say take it from the hands, I don't mean literally remove it from anyone's possession, that they would never do that. What I'm saying is, I mean take it out of the hands in the sense of remove it from the agency of. Remove it so that the people of Middle-earth need give no thought to it, right? We're just going to sweep in and we're going to take it off your hands in that, like, broader sense, right? Yes, they give the people of Middle-earth the chance to show their quality, Tarlonio. That's closer to it, I think. Yeah. Exactly. So that's my new theory as to what Gandalf is thinking when he's looking to the east, and why it is that he's looking at the Misty Mountains in particular, which would seem in some ways to be a slight non sequitur, because I think it doesn't fit with what he says with the I was at fault, just in the sense of I should have been more vigilant, right? I'm not saying he doesn't feel that, because I'm sure he does feel that. And I do think his sigh also is involved with that. Like, he does feel that he could have handled this better, that he could have played his part in this better. But I don't think it's just that. So anyway, thanks for being patient with me. I wanted to kind of work that idea through a little bit. And I certainly agree that I certainly do agree that the word lulled certainly does suggest that Gandalf is implying that Saruman was putting forth his power. And I think that he is kind of tipping his hand here a little bit, intentionally. He's not dropped the bomb yet, the revelation about Saruman's treachery, but he's preparing the way for it, right? By saying, I was lulled by the words of Saruman the Wise, he is preparing people for the revelation that he's going to be giving later on, right? So that it won't come as an utter shock when we finally get there. Now, for Thoughtless, you ask an excellent question, and I'm going to tell you from the beginning, I don't have any definite answer for you in a lot of ways here. But for Thoughtless says, I've never understood the providence in the Lord of the Rings to be actions of the Valar. How can we distinguish between intervention by the powers and by the One? I might be convinced that action by Anduin was the Valar, but these events that looked like pure chance. First of all, I personally think that trying to distinguish between what Iluvatar does and what the Valar do from a Middle-earth perspective, right? I mean, it's one thing in the Silmarillion, right, when the Valar are described as acting and we're getting the descriptions of their actions and all that kind of thing. It's one thing then to say, okay, the Valar, they're choosing to do this, right? They're exerting their own choices to do that. Yeah, Angrist, it definitely feels to me like a distinction without a difference, really. At the end of the day, I mean, the Valar are Iluvatar's agents, and it's clear, like, Iluvatar's a big delegator, right? I mean, yes, we know that Iluvatar does some things directly without the aid or even the knowledge of the Valar. Like, for instance, bringing forth the elves and men. We know to be examples of this. We know that kind of thing happens. But I don't think there's even any fruitful point. That's why I'm so vague about this. That's why I keep saying whether it was Iluvatar or the Valar, we don't know. We don't know, and I don't think there's any way that we can know. It may well be that some of the acts of providence, some of the things which appear to be, which happen by chance, if chance you call it, it could well be that those are all direct interventions of, like, the plan of Iluvatar being worked out. It may be that they are direct interventions by the Valar, which make the plan of Iluvatar work out. It may also be that there's no real way to distinguish between those two things at all from the point of view of the one who is on the receiving end of the act of chance, if chance you call it. So I just, I don't find it a useful question, I guess I would say. So I don't find it useful. Now, I'm not saying it isn't interesting from a purely theological standpoint, but I am saying from the standpoint of the text, I don't think it is really an answerable kind of question. There are some moments when I think we can see the Valar themselves acting in a way which I think is fairly unmistakably the Valar. To me, the number one example, and this is an example I've given many times before, but if you want me to pin myself to one place where I feel very confident that the Valar are acting in The Lord of the Rings, it would be the wind from the sea at the Battle of Pelennor Field. And that strikes me and as a very direct Manwë moment intervening in the battle. But you know, it's unclear. For Thales, we'll get to the return of Gandalf. There's a lot to go over there in Gandalf's words about that. But even there, I'm not really sure that there's... sorry, for Thales, what I'm talking about, as far as the return of Gandalf is concerned, once again, there I find the question of even there trying to figure out, you know, Iluvatar versus the Valar or whatever, is, I don't think, super useful. Anyway, yeah, certainly the wind from the west and the scouring, Sam, I can get behind that one. Absolutely. Like I said, if there were one passage in the whole Lord of the Rings that I had to stake everything on, it would be the wind from the sea at the Battle of Pelennor Field. But I'm not saying I think it's the only one. I'm just saying, like, it's like my top one, right? The one that I feel most 100% confident in. Though I certainly agree that the wind from the west that blows away the spirit of Saruman is a pretty good, I think a fairly safe bet as well. So anyway, let's, we don't have to carry on talking about this forever, but I just wanted to emphasize that's why I am deliberately vague, and honestly, I'm not going to be less vague about this, because again, I think that it's kind of a fool's gambit. I sort of think to really try to think you can make rock solid distinctions between what Iluvatar does and what his delegated servants, whom he's put in charge of the world, to order it after his will do. You know, so it's would it be fair to say that the Valar are a subset of Eru rather than separate? No, not at all. They are definitely separate. They are creatures. So they are not him. But he has delegated the world to them, and he works his will through them. Like, he has given it to them to work, and he has shown them the vision of how he wants things to go. And we know that his providence includes the choices of the Valar as well. That their own choices are also the implementation of, and you know, there is no one who can, including the Valar, who can alter the music in his despite. His providence is all encompassing in that way. But that's exactly why I find it, but that's what I mean when I say that they are the instrument of his providence very often, right? Because they, he has set things in motion for things to happen in a certain way. And a large part of the reason that some of the things happen in the way that they do is because the Valar have chosen that they should. So anyway, yeah. So let's, and Chris is talking about how, we were just talking about this. There seems to be, we're looking at some of Tolkien's own kind of goings back and forth about this and his own thinking through some of these philosophical and theological issues. And it's one of the really fascinating things to see. We're talking about Morgoth's Ring right now, volume 10 of the History of Middle-earth, which is, of course, the volume which describes his return to the Silmarillion material after writing The Lord of the Rings. And it's so fascinating to see the pattern of his revisions and the things that he's wrestling with and thinking through as he is reconciling the Silmarillion to the Lord of the Rings, like making the Silmarillion into the kind of legends and the kind of story that fit with the Lord of the Rings. Completely fascinating stuff. So we have been looking at some of this because some of these theological and philosophical issues are some of the things that Tolkien himself has been wrestling with in the post Lord of the Rings world, actually. So anyway, very good. Okay. Let's oh man, Angra says, I tried to binge Morgoth's Ring over the weekend and it broke my brain. It's tough. The first couple hundred pages of Morgoth's Ring are not easy reading by any stretch, so I totally can sympathize with that. You gotta be careful. You gotta pace yourself, man. You gotta pace yourself. But don't worry, we've slowed way down in the middle, so you got time to catch up before we get to the end. Okay, anyway, but speaking of having time to catch up before we get to the end, let's go back to our passage here. Okay. Elrond's response, we were all at fault, and but for your vigilance, the darkness maybe would already be upon us. I can certainly agree with Chris that certainly sounds like an oft, or at least a several times repeated reassurance of Gandalf by Elrond. But, hang on, so I'm trying to figure out how I want to end that sentence. I want to end with a but. I'm trying to figure out what I want to say but, though. Yes, he said this before, but he's saying it again publicly now, right? Just as I was lulled by the words of Saruman the Wise are a piece of foreshadowing, right, on Gandalf's part, we were all at fault is a public acknowledgement by Elrond. It's not just of solidarity. It's not just a reassurance of Gandalf. Hey man, don't beat yourself up about it. It's not your fault. I mean, he is saying that, but he's not just saying that. He is saying, he is acknowledging, repeating Gandalf's preparation for what's going to happen later on, right? For the revelation that's coming. We were all at fault. To be lulled by the words of Saruman the Wise, right? He too, Elrond, was also lulled by Saruman's words in the same way. So, and Turambar, I think that's who the we is. I mean, I think he's, when he says we were all at fault, I don't think he's speaking on behalf of everyone in the room, right? Yeah, I agree. Glowin would be like, dude, I was not at fault in this regard, right? But Elrond does. Chris asks a wonderful question. I wonder if Galadriel would acknowledge that she was at fault, right? An interesting question, something to look for when we get to Galadriel, perhaps in some ways. But Elrond is quick to own it here, right? And Tony, I have to think that the other people in the room are wondering what they're talking about. But say on, right, is a clear cue to everybody else. I know I'm acknowledging that you don't understand what we're talking about right now, but you will soon. But I'm going to let Gandalf explain it, right? JJ points out that Celeborn would totally blame Glóin. Yeah, fair enough. He probably would. But let's not start beating on Celeborn quite yet, JJ. Though I suppose you could say it's never too early. Anyway. But yeah, let's not talk about Galadriel or Celeborn right now. From the first my heart misgave me, against all reason that I knew, and I desired to know how this thing came to Gollum. Notice the emphasis there, against all reason that I knew. And again, this is the thing that I think that most people overlook when they're thinking that Gandalf's lack of recognition of the Ring of Power is a simple plot hole. And I already pointed out the irony of how Gandalf himself is the first one to make the argument that is usually brought by people who find this a plot hole in the Lord of the Rings. Namely, count the rings, right? Come on, do the math, people, right? It's obviously a Ring of Power. It's not one of the 9. It's not one of the 3. It's almost certainly not one of the 7. You know, what did you think it was, right? How could, why would Tolkien expect us to believe that they were all so stupid as not to figure that out from the very beginning by a very simple process of elimination? The answer to that question is what Gandalf says right here. My heart misgave me against all reason that I knew. So there are two important factors here. One is that everything he knows, his reason tells him it is impossible that this ring could be the Ring of Power, right? It is already known what happened to the ring. Saruman told them, and they have no reason to disbelieve him. He was speaking, because remember, if I'm reading that right, if Saruman's reassurance to them is not just, I'm pretty sure I figured out what happened to it, it probably rolled away hundreds of miles down the river. I'm sure that's probably what happened. If he's not saying that, but if instead he's saying, guys, trust me on this one, I know what I'm talking about, the Valar took it, end of story, right? Part of the cunning of that lie is that it is a lie that one would be very, very reluctant to tell. This is not a garden variety fib on Saruman's part, right? He stakes a lot on that particular lie, right? He's not just putting his own reputation and everything at stake. This is a pretty significant moment, I would say, in Saruman's whole decline. This is going to be one of the things that I'm going to be interested to see examples of as we move forward here. That is Saruman. In Gandalf's story, what do we learn about Saruman? What is he telling us about Saruman exactly? When Saruman went bad and how Saruman went bad. And I want to be careful about something. I want to be careful about being too quick to apply the things that Tolkien tells us elsewhere after the fact. Like in Appendix B, for instance, right? Because Appendix B is written after the fact, after the rest of the story is written. And that's relevant and it's interesting. I'm not saying it doesn't count or anything like that. But what I am saying is we need to be careful, right? I am interested to see what the story is, what we can tell about the story from here, right? I am interested to see that. Because, of course, Tolkien often retcons things and changes his mind about stuff later on or decides that this is how it should be. And so he'll redirect it. And that's great. And again, that is awesome. Tolkien is really good at that, and we should totally pay attention to that. Not saying to disregard it. But when we're trying to answer questions about the text, don't just automatically import data that Tolkien wrote later, right? It's not a bad thing to do, but I don't just want to do that. Do you see what I mean? I think that this is a huge deal. This moment that Gandalf is describing is a huge deal. right? That Saruman should not merely lie about this thing, about this issue. I mean, should not just that Saruman should lie to the rest of the council, but that he should make that lie, that he should play the "I have certain knowledge from the Valar about this" card. This is more than just a make or break for his reputation, right? In the sense of they'll figure out that he's lying or not. It's crossing a line. It's crossing a very important line, I would say, where he is. It is true that it's a deliberate lie to set the council into a mindset of complacency. I agree with that, but again, it's more than that. It is a kind of betrayal of the Valar themselves. The nature of the lie, right? The substance of the lie. It's not just the fact that he's lying and that he's lying about this. To me, this is much more important. Yeah, exactly. It is almost as if he's making them complicit. I mean, he's not making them complicit, right? But I mean, he is. Yeah. Yeah, Tony, yes, it begins to sound like it is in that direction, right? Tony's saying it's sort of similar to Saruman's lie in Numenor about Eru and Melkor. It's closer to that, certainly, than him just trying to mislead them in some other way. It is heresy, Flammifera. Yes, I agree with that, but it's more than just heresy as well. There's a personal betrayal of trust here. These are the Lords of the West, and that's a big deal, but they're also they're his bosses, right? I mean, and there is a deeper exploitation of his role as a wizard, as one of the Astari, right? The Astari were sent by the Lords of the West to Middle-earth in order to protect it, right? To help them to fight against Sauron. And Saruman is here banking on that, right? He is exploiting that fact in order to deceive them, to deceive the people for his own ends, right? Yes, Tony, it is a betrayal, not only of the council, but of the Valar at the same time. Do you see what I mean? What I'm trying to get at here? This seems to me like a really, really big deal. That Saruman is, and because notice one of the consequences of this. Nobody disbelieves him. Nobody disbelieves him, right? Gandalf was lulled. Elrond was lulled. We're all at fault, he says. Nobody. I mean, if this was a calculated gambit on Saruman's part, it absolutely worked. Yes, Marielle, that is exactly it. I knew there was a parallel kicking around in my mind, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And Marielle, you absolutely have it. Marielle says there's a betrayal of authority here, like a partner selling fake relics. Yes, or more importantly, like the 14th century's enormous concern with friars running around and giving easy penance to people. That it wasn't just that they were deceiving people. It wasn't just that they're supposed to be out there helping people's souls, right? And it's not just that they were betraying those people. It's not just that they were letting those people off and misleading those people. It's that in the act of doing that, they were undermining the entire like process of salvation, right? The entire mechanism by which people are meant to be healed was being itself corrupted, right? That's why people got so bothered with. That's why there's so much 14th century literature, which is all concerned about friars, right? You can see this in Chaucer quite a bit. So it's a huge deal. And yes, Luther's concern about the selling of indulgences is very similar in its tone. Yes. Exactly. Well, Dante too, Chris, but he had other issues as well. But anyway, yeah, that's exactly, Mariel. Thank you for suggesting that parallel, because that exactly touches what I'm trying to get at there. That lie that he told was that kind of a big deal. It doesn't just betray that he, as one of the Astari, has gone bad and is working against the free peoples of Middle-earth. It undermines the whole concept of the Astari, right? If you can't trust Saruman the White, the head of the order of the Astari, sent from the Lords of the West in order to be messengers from the Lords of the West, right? Hi, we've come from the Lords of the West to help out, right? And if you can't trust them when they say the Lords of the West have taken care of this, it's okay, then who can you trust, or what can you trust them about, right? What's the point at all? It's a big deal. It's much bigger than just the mere fact that he lied, right? The mere fact that why he might have been motivated to lie. Yeah, the West has failed, says Chris. Yeah, well, if one were to lapse into despair of some kind, one could understand why this kind of situation could lead to that. Yeah, so yeah, and O'Malley, you're absolutely right that there is a much deeper kind of betrayal of the rest of the Astari in this, right? To Gandalf, it would be a very much bigger deal, right? More than just a personal betrayal. It's not only that his friend betrayed him. That happened. Yes, that's true. It's not just that somebody that they thought they could rely upon, and who was a very important part of all their councils, as Galdor's question was showing, right? It's not just that either, right? It's much more than that. And yeah, Tony, we're going to see how he betrayed Radagast too, which is going to play off this same essential concept, right? So, okay. All right. Yes, that is what I was trying to get to. Now, but again, back to Gandalf's first statement there. From the first, my heart misgave me against all reason that I knew. Reason that I knew, right? I had knowledge of what had come of the Ring of Power, right? Of Sauron's ring. Gandalf knew this because Saruman had told him on excellent authority, right? What had happened to Sauron's ring. So there was no way, whatever that ring, there's some kind of mystery about this ring, right? And he should probably figure that out. But one of the things that he knows for sure, again, the same kind of process of elimination that Gandalf himself applies, right? Can't be one of the 9, can't be one of the 3. Trust me, it can't be one of the 7. He would have done the same thing. Well, can't be the 1, right? Can't be the 3. So what could it possibly be? He knew, had reasons to know that it was not the 1, and yet his heart misgave him, right? JJ says, is there any possibility of another ring being made by someone with such properties? Yes. Is that at least as likely as that Saruman, on his very good authority, is mistaken about what happened to the 1? Yeah, that's got to be at least as possible, right? And probably more possible. Remember, there is a lot that is not known even about the Rings of Power, right? Literally, what do they know? A rhyme? Right? Seriously? That's the source of who knows? what Celebrimbor was up to. Did Celebrimbor reveal his entire mind to the rest of the wise? You think so? Right? What about Sauron? Right? What was he up to? We know that he made other lesser rings. Oh, but they were much lesser and they wouldn't have had these effects. Are you sure? Have you run tests? Right? Do we have clear testimony about this? Nobody knows what had happened exactly, right? So again, there are some things that he knows and that he's clinging to as knowledge, right? But there's a lot that he knows that he does not know. There's a lot that everyone is still ignorant about. Exactly what did Celebrimbor get up to before and after Sauron came in, right? What were those other lesser rings, which Gandalf dismisses when he's talking to Frodo about them? But remember, that's after he's already figured out the real truth, right? That's not necessarily how Gandalf's thought process would have run, you know, right after the quest of Erebor, when he first began to have misgivings in his heart about this particular ring. Exactly, Matt. Yeah, the problem is that the peer-reviewed journals from the Second Age were secured behind a paywall, so most people couldn't get access to them. It's been a problem for a really long time. I agree. That's probably it. Yeah. So anyway, all right. So Gandalf's emphasis here is that despite the fact that I knew for a fact it could not possibly be the Great Ring, that was off the table, his heart misgave him. So we have this cognitive dissonance that Gandalf is aware of from the beginning, right? I know it's not the one because we know what happened to the one. But something is bothering me about this ring, and I don't know why. I don't know why it bothers me as much as it does. I desired to know how this thing came to Gollum and how long he had possessed it. Okay, so he decides he's going to try to figure out where Gollum's ring came from. Because even if it's not the one, that's probably good to know, right? Because, I mean, clearly this ring is obviously of interest, right? It's obviously a powerful ring of some kind or other, whatever its provenance may be, right? This is worth knowing, right? So let's try to figure this out, right? Let's try to figure out the provenance of that ring. So I set a watch for him, guessing that he would ere long come forth from his darkness to seek for his treasure. He came, but he escaped and was not found. Which, by the way, is kind of a, like... So I immediately fired the people that I had hired to set a watch for him because they obviously did a terrible job. Now, Zephin, I don't know who the watch was. I kind of have to assume that it was the Wood Elves, but he doesn't say exactly whom he set to watch for Gollum when he came out. It might be the Rangers, Turambar. If he'd come out on the other side of the mountains, would he have set the Rangers to watch on the east side of the mountains? It's possible that he did so. It's maybe the Bjornings, Tony, conceivably. Yeah. Yeah. Karita is pointing out that he's being very polite, you know, not blasting anybody, or he's not calling out any names here, right? And I would just like to say for the record, you know, that you know, whoever it was, like, did a terrible job, and it's all their fault, right? Yeah, he's not said. Exactly. Veronica says mistakes were made. Exactly. Yeah, O'Malley says, knowing how fond Bjorn was of wizards, it wasn't likely them. Yeah, it's a little hard for me to see the Bjornings being in this kind of a relationship with Gandalf. They might be trusty men, as Glóin says, but I doubt that they would be that close to Gandalf. Anyway, so he's concealing the identity of the Watchers that he set up there, and instead blames himself, right? I let the matter rest, watching and waiting only, as we have too often done, right? I just decided to be patient. Now, keep in mind one of the things that's implied here, right? First, one of the things that seems to me to be implied here is that this is not the most important thing in his life right now. You know what I mean? He was interested in finding out about Bilbo's ring, but although he was interested, he doesn't prioritize it, right, above everything else. Yeah, Turambar, Gandalf does speak the tongues of birds and beasts. It is possible that he set them up to watch. I gotta tell you, I doubt that that's what happened. And the primary reason I doubt that that's what happened is that it's hard for me to imagine the birds and beasts letting Gollum slip past them, right? A human watch, even an elvish watch, I could see Gollum eluding. But if he'd really set, a strict cordon of birds and beasts around, I kind of I can't help but think that might have been more effective, actually. But anyway. Yeah. One last point I want to make here before we move on. There's a word in this sentence. That I've never really paid attention to. And I'm trying to think if it might be one of the moments when Rob Inglis misspoke in the audiobook version. His darkness. Guessing that he would ere long come forth from his darkness to seek for his treasure. I've never noticed that first pronoun. To seek for his treasure, of course. But his darkness, right? Come forth from his darkness to seek for his treasure. Instead of saying, come forth from the darkness, which he could well have said, right? Which would have been kind of normal to say, right? But he doesn't say that, right? Instead, he says to come forth from his darkness to seek for his treasure. Now, it's his darkness in the sense of being the darkness that he has claimed, right? That he has lived in. But that sentence, that use of the possessive there, seems to be itself, just as his statement, I was lulled by the words of Saruman the Wise, are kind of a foretaste of the revelation that he's going to give later on. That phrasing, he would ere long come forth from his darkness to seek for his treasure, seems to be a foretaste of Book 4 of The Lord of the Rings, right? Is Gollum going to come forth from his darkness? Is the search for his treasure going to draw him out of his darkness, enable him to emerge from his darkness, or is it going to bury him deeper in his darkness? And of course, as we will see, that's still very much up in the air, right? And Gollum seems to have a choice in that, which is not fully decided, right, until some tragic moments later on. And Tom, it absolutely does underline his difficulty, Gollum's difficulty in doing so, in coming forth from the darkness. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Gandalf's waxed eyebrows, referring both to the physical darkness of his haunt and to his sort of psychological and spiritual darkness induced by the ring, Absolutely. Yeah. Now, do I think that that's what Gandalf is alluding to? No, no. He's clearly just talking about him coming out from under the mountains. That's what the sentence alludes to. But given how important that idea, the question of, is Gollum going to emerge from his own spiritual darkness, right? Gandalf has already told Frodo that there is no hope that Gollum will do so, right? And of course, this is going to become a very important issue as we get into Book 4. But yeah, Turambar, I agree that Gollum is going to come forth from the physical darkness, and he's going to bring the spiritual darkness along with him. That's exactly it. But that's exactly the question. Is he going to come forth from his darkness? So, yeah, and like I said, I've literally never noticed that word. I can't even remember. I can't even remember whether or not, because there are a couple places where Rob Inglis misreads the text. One or two places where he does the wrong voice, but a couple other places where he just misspeaks, as any reader will at times. And I wonder. I wonder. Anyway, just interesting. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this bit again to see if my theory is right. Anyway, okay. We still got a little time. Let's go on to the next slide. How about that? Time passed with many cares, until my doubts were awakened again to sudden fear. Whence came the hobbit's ring? What, if my fear was true, should be done with it? Those things I must decide, but I spoke yet of my dread to none, knowing the peril of an untimely whisper if it went astray. In all the long wars with the Dark Tower, treason has ever been our greatest foe. That was 17 years ago. Soon I became aware that spies of many sorts, even beasts and birds, were gathered round the Shire, and my fear grew. I called for the help of the Dunedain, and their watch was doubled, and I opened my heart to Aragorn, the heir of Isildur. Okay. So much here. All right. First, time passed with many cares until my doubts were awakened again to sudden fear. What's he referring to? He's not telling the whole story. He's not giving all the details. But we know it. What's he referring to? Yeah, the birthday party, Bilbo's departure, right? His alarm at Bilbo's action, his calling the ring his precious, right? That surely is what he's referring to then. His doubts being awakened again to sudden fear. Notice something. He says, he doesn't mention it. Notice how indirect he's being again? Doesn't it seem to you like this is the second time that first Elrond and now Gandalf have pointedly avoided telling the story? Right? Yeah, Angristy's using the passive voice again. He absolutely is. My doubts were awakened again to sudden fear. He's avoiding telling the story. The same story that Elrond cut in and didn't let Bilbo tell. And that's interesting. Still not 100% sure what to make of that. But it's interesting. And I'm now even more interested in that than I was before. But anyway, whence came the hobbit's ring? What, if my fear was true, should be done with it? So now he seems to be, though again, very indirectly, because he's still Gandalf, suggesting that he now fears. So he dates, in this recitation, he is dating his fear that the ring is in fact the ring of power to after Bilbo's party. Right? That now he is actively saying, now he's actively saying, I think this is Sauron's ring here, right? Sauron's ring until proven otherwise. Whence came it? How is it? Could it be possible? Right? Now he's not just saying, hey, wouldn't it be kind of nice to know where Bilbo's ring came from? Now he's saying, I need to prove a theory, right? Because I have a very disquieting theory about Bilbo's ring, and now I really need to confirm whether or not this theory is accurate, right? Yeah, could it be that Saruman was actually wrong all this time? That has to be one of the other things that he's thinking of there. Gandalf's waxed eyebrows. I completely agree. Yeah. Yeah, Tom, I do note that he doesn't say, what if my fear were true? If he used the subjunctive there, he would be expressing a doubt in his fear, right? He's saying, what if my fear was true, right? He's not, that's not a supposition, right? If my fear was true, then what should be done with it, right? If that is a fact, then what should be done with it? Those things I must decide. Both, first, how it could possibly have come down to Bilbo. How can we confirm that this is definitely it, right? But also then, now what? What should happen? But I spoke yet of my dread to none, knowing the peril of an untimely whisper, if it went astray. Who's he afraid might learn about it? Who's Gandalf keeping this from? In all the long wars with the Dark Tower, treason has ever been our greatest foe. First of all, really? Treason has ever been your greatest foe? How many times have they been betrayed? That's a really interesting statement, because it's one that is hard to, I mean, it's not that you can come up with no examples, but are we allowed to refer to the Silmarillion for this? Look, even if we go back to the Silmarillion, I mean, we could lump Maegwyn in there, right? We could lump Ulf, the Ulfgar, the humans in the Near Ninth Arnoediad. We could do that, right? I can still count the betrayals on, like, betrayals, like treason, on what, like one hand, right? Loose lips sink Numenor. Kind of, though. Numenor is kind of hard. I don't know. I can't go to Numenor for an example of treason here. What are we going to accuse Sauron of treason? Right? Did anybody think that was a good idea? I mean, it's like, talk about, like, curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal, right? I mean, never was that more true than of Sauron in Numenor. I mean, really. So yeah, I mean, yes. Did he betray them? Yes, he did. But seriously, it's, yes, Anatar, agreed. Anatar was an example. Yeah, I'm willing to grant Anatar. There's Anatar. There's Maegwyn. Again, I'm not I'm not trying to say there are no examples of treason. I'm just saying, in all the long wars with the Dark Tower, treason has ever been our greatest foe. With the Dark Tower? So he's not talking about the Silmarillion. He's not talking about treasons I have known in the First Age. He's talking about with Mordor, presumably, in the wars against Sauron. Yeah, Mad Violinist, the Oathbreakers? I mean, look, I'm not saying the Oathbreakers weren't a big deal, especially for them, right? But, like, did the Oathbreakers turn the tide? I'm just... I am absolutely willing to believe, Ambrosius Aurelianus, that there are probably many battles and struggles against the Dark Tower which go unremarked in the great histories. Yes, almost certain. I'm very ready to believe that. But that by itself is interesting. Yeah. Now, but here's the thing. Is he talking about Saruman? Is he worried about Saruman? This is tricky. Because on the one hand, he has to be. Suspicion, at least, that Saruman was lying. Because there are two options, right? Gandalf now believes... Now, note, he hasn't proven it, right? So, Gandalf is reflecting back to what he was thinking at the time. So, put yourself in Gandalf's place right after the long-expected party, right? You're basically saying there are three options, right? Either Saruman was wrong, right? Honestly incorrect. He believed this had happened to the ring, but he was wrong. Or he was lying on purpose, attempting to deceive us about the ring. Or Gandalf is wrong and it isn't the ring, right? His doubts might have been awakened to sudden fear, and his fear, he is thinking, may very well be true, right? But it's not confirmed yet. So that is still an option, right? But either Saruman was wrong or Saruman was like, it's gotta be on the table, right? Can I trust Saruman? 'Cause yeah, if this is the Ring of Power, then Saruman was either wrong or lying. But for Thoughtless, exactly the problem we have is he's still going to go to Isengard after this. He is still going to trust Saruman. Exactly. No, several of you are pointing that out, and that's exactly this is to me one of the big challenges here. I want to try to understand this because I don't know why. I have no answer to that question. It's hard for me to see how his fear of treason, it's not just spies of the enemy. He talked to Frodo about spies of the enemy, right? And there's plenty of reason to be worried about spies of the enemy, right? But a spy of Sauron overhearing him telling someone his fears, you know, that would be characterized as treason, right? Espionage, yes. Treason, no. So by treason, he has to mean that one of the people that they trust has turned against them or is going to turn against them. I agree, JJ. If he merely thought that Saruman were mistaken, he wouldn't explicitly link it to treason, right? Saruman being wrong isn't treason, right? Lamentable, perhaps, but it isn't treason. Angrist, that is one possibility. One possibility is that Gandalf is imperfectly relating his story from a historical standpoint, that he is projecting back upon his general caution then, something which has proven to be the case later on. Do you understand what I mean by that? Yeah. Yeah. Tony's referred to the Tolkien building on this in Unfinished Tales. That passage in Unfinished Tales that you're thinking of, Tony, is exactly like I am trying as hard as I can to avoid that passage. That's actually that passage, as much as I really kind of like it in a lot of ways, that passage is one of my least favorite passages in Tolkien, actually. You want a plot hole? That's a plot hole, in my opinion. I cannot reconcile it. I cannot reconcile it. If that happened. So, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, let me explain. In Unfinished Tales, Tolkien depicts Gandalf as not only being suspicious that Saruman was lying at the time during that White Council meeting, but Gandalf also making the open implication to Saruman that not only was he lying, but that Saruman's own desire, personal desire for the ring was causing him to lie. The version of the story that Tolkien tells about it in Unfinished Tales suggests that Gandalf knew Saruman was lying and knew that he was being caused to lie by his desire for the Ring of Power at that meeting when he said that business about the ring being rolled down the river to the sea. And honestly, I can't. I can't reconcile that. I just can't. I've never been able to reconcile it. Like, that, to me, that just doesn't fit the story at all. It does not work. So anyway, JJ says that was just Gandalf telling the story later, trying to make himself look good. Well, sort of. I mean, in a sense. But anyway, yeah. So, Tony, that's precisely the problem, that because I think we're going to have a problem. We're going to have a problem, like, in a matter of paragraphs. If Gandalf is already, if his first thought is Saruman is a traitor, if that's his first thought, we're going to have troubles, right? I am very willing to believe that Tolkien, writing extra stories about the wizards later on, wrote a version of the story where the retcon does not succeed really well. I'm perfectly willing to believe that. That's my own personal explanation for that story. Especially because it's a fun story that involves smoke rings. But this is internal consistency of this narrative, not just of the Lord of the Rings narrative, of Gandalf's narrative in this chapter, right? And that is a lot harder, right? So the idea that he is kind of projecting backwards his retrospective thoughts about it, right? That is that now the first thing that he thinks of is treason, right? This doesn't mean that it was untrue that Gandalf was speaking of his dread. So the historical statement, right? At the time of the long expected party, the thing that bears historical weight is Gandalf saying, "I spoke yet of my dread to none," right? I didn't tell anybody. Knowing the peril of an untimely whisper if it went astray. And that's certainly true, right? Because there are spies of the enemy all over the place. I mean, goodness, look how cautious Aragorn is, right? So absolutely, at the time, he doubtless was, like, this is a pretty big question, right? And so, no, he's not going to go down to the Green Dragon and be speculating. Like, I wonder, anybody ever think whether or not Bilbo's ring might be the one ring of Sauron, right? Did that thought ever occur to anybody else, right? He's not going to talk about this in public, right? So that he didn't speak of his dread, that he knows the peril of an untimely whisper, that he doesn't want it to go astray, meaning astray seems to suggest that it would get to the enemy, right? That last sentence, though, could be not him. So, and notice he doesn't actually even put that in the past tense, right? He doesn't say that he thought at the time, in all the long wars with the Dark Tower, treason has ever been our greatest foe. That's a current reflection on it, right? Which does give the impression that that's what was motivating him at the time. But maybe this is a further reflection that he's offering now, again in the spirit of preparing people for the revelation that's going to come not too long from now about the treason of Saruman. Like, brace yourself, right? I was lulled by the words of Saruman. Now I'm talking about treason, right? I hope that you can see what I'm building up to so nobody faints when I get there, right? Yeah. That was 17 years ago. Soon I became aware that spies of many sorts, even beasts and birds, were gathered round the Shire, and my fear grew. Spies of many sorts, even beasts and birds were. Now I saw some of you asking, how can you tell when a beast or bird is acting as a spy for somebody? I would suggest that it's probably not like how they're acting, right? It's the shades, says Tom. Yeah. They've just looking really dubious. Yeah, Edith, I think that's very likely. Exactly. Yeah, it's probably the species of creature, right? Finding creatures that don't normally come here now are suddenly all around the borders of the Shire. Yeah, Belongsmon says they look fair but feel foul, right? And some of them probably more foul than others. Yeah, exactly. But I agree, JJ, probably not robins. They're good birds in all the stories. I agree. Yeah, that's probably what we're talking about here. Yeah, Corey, but the fox is clearly fine, right? Not suspicious at all, right? You can tell unless the fox was a very cunning double agent indeed, but yeah, probably not. No, man, I refuse to believe it of the fox. You can think that the fox was a spy of the enemy if you want, but I'm not saying, it's possible that somebody could get to the fox and lean on him, right, so that he could tell them all that he'd seen. But I like to think that the fox got away with it. So anyway, I see. I also think, eyebrows, that the poor fox was just minding his own business. But of course, if he were a really effective spy, that's just what that's just what you would think. Anyway, we know what's really happening there. What was really happening there? Who sent the spies? Why are there spies gathering around the Shire? Who sent the spies? Saruman sent the spies. We know that for sure. Gandalf didn't know that at the time, but we know that for sure, because Sauron hasn't even found the Shire. He doesn't even know where the Shire is, right? Remember the ring wraiths are going out being like, hi, excuse me, do you know where the Shire is? Have you ever heard of it? Can I get directions to the Shire right there? I mean, they're winding their way across the continent, asking door to door where to find the Shire. If Sauron already knew where to send his spies, you'd think the Black Riders would have made a beeline there, right? So yeah, the Nazgul are the first of Sauron's spies to show up at Bag End. But Gandalf doesn't know that, right? Gandalf certainly doesn't know that. Right, Tom is suggesting that the birds and beasts that Gandalf was seeing might possibly have been sent by Lobelia in the hope of scoring some more spoons. Also possible. Anyway, yeah. So we know that that's not the case. But again, you're Gandalf, right? You're Gandalf, and it's 17 years ago, and you've just realized, holy cow, Bilbo's ring is probably the One Ring. Mind blown, right? I didn't think it was possible. I had this fear. My heart was telling me, my heart was misgiving me, right? But I was like, no, it can't be that. It can't be, we know it can't be the ring, It's got to be something else, right? I gotta just let it go. It's going to be okay. And then wham, holy cow, it's probably the Ring of Power. And now there are spies everywhere. What else is he going to think, right? That these are the spies of an enemy within their, hiding within their own ranks? That he's been betrayed by, one of his closest colleagues? No, right? That's not going to be where he's first going to go, right? So he is suspicious that spies of the enemy are at hand. Remember, he talked to Frodo about spies of the enemy being at hand. They thought that Sam outside the window might be a spy of the enemy, right? So there's nothing unreasonable about this. But remember that Gandalf has already said to Frodo that they overestimated Sauron. They overestimated the danger from Sauron. Very natural that they should do so, right? I called for the help of the Dunedain, and their watch was doubled, and I opened my heart to Aragorn, the heir of Isildur. Now, their watch was doubled. Of course, they were already watching the Shire, obviously, right? They've been protecting the Shire for some time. They didn't begin their watch on the Shire. They doubled their watch on the Shire, right? And he opens his heart to Aragorn. So I told Aragorn my fears, and he introduces him, right? I opened my heart to Aragorn, the heir of Isildur. Almost as if to explain why he opened his heart to Aragorn. Like pointing to the fact that it was fitting that he do so, right? Fitting that he should open his heart to Aragorn, since he's the heir of Isildur and all, right? Yes, Enoch says, is Gandalf implying that he told Aragorn before he told Elrond and Galadriel? 100% yes. I think that is exactly what he is implying. Now, does it say that he never told Elrond? No, he told Elrond, I'm sure. Did he tell Aragorn first? I think he might have done. He leaves the Shire pretty quickly after the party, right? I don't know. I mean, I guess I could go both ways about that. Enoch. It doesn't mean he necessarily has to be running off to Aragorn straight from Bag End, right after the party, right? He could well have gone to Elrond first, and talked with him about it, and then decided because my question would be, when in the sequence of events here did he perceive this, that the spies of many sorts were gathered around the Shire, right? He says, soon I became aware of this, right? But again, we know he left Bag End very soon, right? Frodo was hoping that he would stick around, but he leaves that same night, right? Does he right then become aware of the spies? If so, then he might go to Aragorn immediately, right? On the way out, Tony. I could absolutely see that. So it's impossible to say. It depends on, but like, I certainly don't think it impossible or even unlikely that he might have told Aragorn before he told Elrond. Because what's Elrond going to do about it? I mean, advise him, right? But there's no real reason to think that, you know, he like would feel a responsibility to tell, like there would be a bad thing to like not run straight to Elrond with it. Matt says, he says, I just now realized that the hobbits may have noticed when the watch was doubled, when there was an increase in the number of big people and the trouble they're having with them in the South Farthing. Or maybe they noticed the spies, for that matter, right? It's possible. Either way is possible. The Rangers would likely be more discreet. Possibly. I mean, yeah, probably. But Zephin, that's just what I was building up to. Why bring up the whole Heir of Isildur business again now? Like, we've established Aragorn's credentials, right? We don't need to keep, you know, flashing his ID card every time we refer to him. It does make it sound like for some reason he feels this fitting, or like he is offering this almost as further justification, right? Which Aragorn is going to immediately pick up on and emphasize himself, right? It's almost like he's handing Aragorn the transition, the segue, right? But yeah, Tony, because it's Aragorn's mission to defeat Sauron, seems like the logical point there, right? Aragorn is the heir of Isildur. He is the ancestral enemy. And we've established, not just established who he is, but we've established what that means, right? Remember with the broken sword and following in the footsteps of Elendil and being willing to die and all these other things, right? We've established that this is his job and this is his role. And Gandalf is saying, I knew this about him, right? I knew that Aragorn is professionally committed to the war against Sauron. And therefore, I opened my heart to him. That made sense, right? Okay. All right, good. I could go on to another slide, but I should not do. It's getting late. I've been feeling bad. I've been kind of creeping later and later with class and with my field trip times. And I'm trying to turn over a new leaf and not do that. Anyway, I'm gonna stop here. Aragorn is gonna break in with his speech next time, and we'll talk about what they did next. There we go. All right, not idly do the leaves turn, Tom says. Absolutely. All right, so I'm gonna say goodnight to the folks. Actually, it looks like my Twitter crashed a little while back. Awesome. Yeah. So thanks everybody for joining. We're gonna do the field trip now. All right. There we go. Hey there. Yeah, it looks like my Periscope has been, my Twitter thing has been dubious. All right, we're heading back to Angmar, so I'm gonna go up to Gathforthnear again.
All right.
Yeah, my Periscope has been having issues lately. It just crashed about 3/4 of the way through class tonight. Not sure why.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, it is interesting to hear all this very indirect diplomatic sort of language being used the entire time. It does make it's the other thing it makes me wonder is if the guilty parties are in his presence and he's just sort of actively avoiding directly accusing them at that point. You know, things happened. Legolas.
Right.
And,
yeah. Exactly.
Gollum escaped.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And or just maybe it's within Legolas. If it is Legolas's fault, or that is if it is the Wood Elves' fault, then maybe he's just saving them because like Legolas is himself going to be confessing their incompetence soon enough, right? So he's just kind of waiting for them to bring the hammer down on themselves there, rather than having to do it as his own self. But yeah, it's a question I very rarely ask myself, of whom Gandalf set to watch, because I kind of think it has to be the elves. I mean, it's them or the Dunedain are really the only two. I mean, we see him acting with both of them during this whole segment, right? The whole Gollum related segment. But I it's just like what a failing report card for the Wood Elves across the board, right? I mean, like, did they do anything?
Can't you Hicks do anything right?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't. Right? I mean, it's just like
Stupid
one
Hicks.
failure after another. I mean, you couldn't see him when he came out, right? He slipped past you. You couldn't find him again after he was on the loose, and then you couldn't even keep him when we handed him to you. I mean,
Wood Elves have not had a great track record of keeping prisoners, though.
Right? Yeah, it's true.
Too much Dorwinian red.
We've decided to entrust Gollum to your keeping because we know your prisons are super secure, right? So the odds of anybody escaping from your prison are practically nil. So
yeah, I mean, you still got the same jailer, but I'm sure he's learned his lesson by now, right?
I'm sure, yeah. Still drinking, not quite as heavily as before, So
yes, he's going to meetings now.
Ardencran suggests that Gandalf wrote letters of warning about Gollum to all the good peoples of Mirkwood, but unfortunately he left the letters with Butterbur for delivery, so
oh no,
it didn't work out.
In one ear and out another. The other thing that makes me wonder is whether it's a courtly language thing, because we are in the home of the elves, and as we've mentioned before, elves are very indirect. That's just in their nature. It makes me wonder if Gandalf is adapting to the style of speech you should take and use in an elven court discussion.
Maybe. I mean, he's
like there's
fairly indirect himself but usually when Gandalf is dodging, he's normally dodging about, like theological matters, basically.
Don't mention the big V over here. No.
Exactly. Okay. All right. So tonight we are headed down towards Barad Gularan, right?
Ooh, yes.
Because I think we pretty much finished Imlad Balchorth.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we head down that way. All right. Let us. So we still got some people arriving. I don't know if they're arriving to come with us, but if they do, they will have seen us leaving, so.
Yep.
All right.
Let's see. Yeah, we go out to the main road.
Come out to the main road and take a left this time instead of going south.
Lots of pretty spiders. Yes. They come in such beautiful colors here. They really are the prettiest thing in this landscape.
It's true, especially given how monochrome everything else is.
I know.
The tents, of course, those tents are quite nice as well. But yeah, you're right. The spiders are like little
The
bursts
amazing
of bright
Technicolor
color.
spider.
Yeah. And now that's true. Firmius Boujan was pointing out that as far as we know, the cells themselves are quite secure, right? I mean,
Yeah, they couldn't have got out without Bilbo getting the key. That's for
exactly,
sure.
right.
Is this a roving threat? Whoa, rare elite master.
Whoa, who is
Hang on.
that?
The old god. Oh, he's going right for you.
Oh, well, that's okay. He won't get me. Whoa, dear. No, rare elite
Wow.
master indeed. So, what was he? Just a...
It looked like some sort of cod ghoul, but
Yeah.
like a gray version.
Oh, never seen that guy.
I wonder what the gray would be. Something ghoul with.
So he's just a random elite mob?
Yeah, pretty much.
Like the gigantic hand?
Yeah, like the gigantic hand.
Yeah. Okay, hang on a second. It's another one of these.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, lady priest.
Yeah. Angmar and Priestess.
This one is. Uh-huh.
I'm looking at her staff here. With the eye on top? Funny, it disappeared when the arrow came.
Huh.
The staff, she had no more staff in her hand when she was lying dead. Someone looted her corpse even before she died.
Jeepers.
So we have this, one of the altars with the shiny iron crown on it. Again, under one of the pavilions, which looks like one of the pavilions of the... Oh, I'm forgetting the name again. The Trave Galorg, is that it? No, or are those the good guys?
Straf Galark are the guys. Duvardine?
Trave Duvardine, that's it. That's
Trave
it.
Duvardine, there we go.
Yes, thank you, Edith. That's it. So this tent looks like them. This pavilion, I should say, looks like them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, in the service of Angmar.
Yep.
Yeah, still trying to figure out exactly the dynamics there. Well, now this is a nice view, as that's where we're headed.
It's like an evil postcard.
It is like an evil postcard. Trying to date it. I mean, it looks like old Angmar, right? Except the spikes at the top look kind of like the new Angmar spikes, but I think there's...
Yeah, the evil radio antenna.
Exactly. They could have added those, could they? But from a distance, it does look like this is an older structure.
And it's definitely, it looks like there's, on the map, it looks like there's 8 spires around the central one, so 9 total.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. So Trifle was just saying in the Twitch chat that he was in Enuminus the other day, and the Angmarim there have these same tents, but there are no Trave Duvardine.
Okay, see, I did have suspicions about that. I did mention that it would be interesting to compare them to the Angmar around Lake Evendim, because I know I'd seen tents like these. So it would imply that these are sort of the Black Numenorian aesthetic.
Okay, but you see...
Thank you for looking that up.
This leads me to a further... Hey, this is a much brighter version of the postcard.
Oh, yeah.
We got out from under the clouds there.
Weather is here. Wish you were beautiful.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So okay. So now here's what I'm thinking now. Wait, who's the dwarf?
Dower hand.
Yeah. Why are there dower hands here?
Well, they are making an alignment with them.
Where have we seen dower hands? I haven't seen any dower hands around.
I think each of these towers has their own theme, honestly.
Are there Dour Hands that live in Barad Gularan themselves?
I don't know, but maybe? I think so. I think like each area had its own sort of, evil bosses. So I'm pretty sure one of them is Dour Hand. So so when we're looking at the tents, then it does seem to indicate that the orange slices and the dual and the bifurcated dual color tent awnings seem to come from the Angmar themselves, while the Trev Duverdine ones are the ones that we see that are all the different pelts stitched together.
Right. Okay. I have a radical theory. This leads me to a radical theory.
Okay.
Here's my radical theory. Originally, in old Angmar, the Angmarim were invaders. That is, they were like the Witch King brought a posse the first time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He imported folks, so they were not the natives of the region. The natives of the region were like the Trev Duverdine and the others, the Trev Galorg, and the others. Those were like the hillmen who lived here, right? Okay. Now they were corrupted to the service of Angmar, we're told, right? So eventually they come to serve Angmar. But again, originally you've got the Angmarim who are coming in and who are both like oppressing and also recruiting the hillmen themselves.
Yeah, all the red cloaks.
Exactly. But now I wonder if that's not the case anymore, because the Witch King doesn't exactly have a whole bunch of surplus armies to import into the north of, old Arnor here, right?
Yeah.
Here's what I'm wondering. What if the Angmarim, the modern Angmarim, this second wave of Angmarim, are the Trev Duverdine? What if they are this? So, like, what happened here is not we've got a second influx of, like, evil Angmarim, right, who come from somewhere else, goodness knows where, imported again by the Witch King, or exported by the Witch King because he's not here this time. Well, he is, except he's not. It's, you know what I mean. He's not an Angmar, right? He's not set up an Angmar this time. But he sends, Mordorith up here to start whipping up operations again in the north.
Okay.
So what Mordorith then has to do is, he doesn't get, like, the Witch King brought in an army of folks the first time, right? But with so that's what the Witch King does the first time. But this time he doesn't have an army to send with Mordorith into the north. So instead, he just sends Mordorith and, like, the other folks, right?
Minions.
Like some other minions, not necessarily like a whole bunch of Angmarim, but I mean like spiritual minions, like the other, the other spirits, the other like wicked spirits and stuff. So he sent some of those with him. So Mordorith shows up, and he's like, "Hey guys, Iron Crown is back, right? Karn Doom is back in action." And so many of those who were part of his who were part of the following, those who still followed the traditions of Angmar, the hillmen who still remember their allegiance to Angmar of old, convert, essentially.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Right. So there are the Angmarim. So, like, the ones in the robes and everybody, they are Angmarim, but they are from the Trev Duverdine. There isn't really a difference. There's obviously a difference in that, like, some of them dress differently. But what I mean is, this would help to explain why I was having such a hard time at the previous encampment, the one by the fishing village, right, up in Himbar. Why I was having such a hard time trying to figure out the dynamics, like who is dominating whom, right? Why were there people in Angmarim robes hoeing the fields, while there were, hillmen from dressed in traditional garb from the woods, appearing to watch over them as if they were the superiors and the Angmarim were the inferiors, right? Well, an answer to that would be they're all the same. They're all part of the same culture. Some of them have officially become the followers. Exactly, Trifle. So Angmar is now a cult, not a people. Yes, exactly. Some of them
makes a lot of sense.
have left their traditional traditions, right, of dress and of occupation and stuff like that, right, and have become priests and priestesses of Angmar, right, and that's why we see them worshiping, like we just saw, right, iron crown altars with fancy blue flames beneath what looks for all the world like a traditional Treve du Verdine canopy. And it would also explain, Trifle, why when you meet Angmarim elsewhere, they're using those canopies, right?
Yeah.
Because they are Treve du Verdine. They're moving south, right? In obedience to their overlords. That's my radical new theory.
That's cool. It also implies that they're getting supplies from somewhere else as well, then. Like for the fancy robes and the fancy everything else. They have some sort of textile manufacturing that has nothing to do with this. Maybe out of supplies at the Shire, who knows? Right.
And it would create a really interesting dynamic, which has an interesting interaction with the stuff that we've been looking at architecturally, right? Because, again, if we think...
we know for a fact there is a trade route through here.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, exactly. Right, so if we think about then what... Yeah, actually this makes sense of a whole bunch of things, architecturally speaking, of stuff that we've been seeing. There are places where we can see the old Hillman culture, right?
Yeah.
But then where we can see the old Angmarim fortresses built by old Angmar, right?
Yeah.
And then new Angmar kind of imposed back among them, but we still see everybody all just still kind of living together, right?
Yeah.
So if this is what happened, it would make sense. So it would be first the Hillmen were living in their own separate cultures, right? And then the Witch King and Angmar comes and suppresses their original culture and brings them into the worship of Sauron and the sort of the reverence for the Iron Crown. Right.
They're Tudor style barracks.
Right. But they're still outsiders, right? Imposing this new culture upon the Hillmen. But then that is the Angmarim and the Witch King himself, go away, right? After 1974, and the Witch King is defeated by the Númenóreans, the Gondorians, that is to say. And Angmar is destroyed to the least and last. Their armies march out and they don't come back, leaving only the Hillmen, right, who now remain, and they take over. That is, like, of course, what do you do, right? You're in this land where your overlords, your foreign overlords who came in, are now gone, right? They leave and they don't come back. Well, you live in their buildings, right? You take over these old fortifications and things, not without any memory necessary of your old allegiance, right? You can totally do that. But now, when they come back again, not the overlords, right? But like the gods of those overlords, right? The spirits of those overlords.
The Karguls and the Nazgul.
Exactly, right. And the Karguls themselves also fit into this picture if you think about it, right? We know from watching Umdir at the very beginning, right, how Karguls get to be Karguls. We saw one formed, right?
Yes.
And so presumably that also helps to explain, like, that Kargul in the fishing village, right? He could be a local, right? So what do? Like, you turn, that Mordorith would have had, like, some Morgul weapons, right? Stabbity stab, you turn one of the local people, right? And now he's a Kargul.
Probably a leader. A leader.
Exactly. You go to the local leader of that village, you turn him into a Kargul. Now he is like, yes, my lord, I am now a wraith who obeys the wraiths, right? And so he's going to bring. So now a large portion of the population says, "Hey, okay, right? Oh, yes, right. The worship of the Iron Crown. We remember all this. Absolutely. It's been, more than 1,000 years, but But sure, right? Let's go back to that by all means. And so some of us are going to become priests and priestesses of the, of the Dark Lord and the Red Eye and the Iron Crown. And we're going to put on the nice fancy new gray and or purple robes and things. But we're still intermingling. And so even some of us who wear the robes of the Angmarim are still going to be hoeing the fields.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, works.
Yeah,
it still feeds the assimilation theory, but it's a longer game than we thought.
Exactly. And so Trifle was just saying you could also have some Angmarim staying, but without the support of the Witch King, they would just kind of assimilate with the Hillmen and become one people afterwards. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And then yes, exactly. More than 1,000 years has passed since that time. So the descendants of the old Angmarim invaded. In fact, Trifle, this is really quite delightful, right? What do we have? We have, in fact, a parallel to the Númenórean situation in Gondor, right? Where you have the indigenous Gondorians and you have the Númenóreans who come in and who accept them as lords and, revere the things that they revere and embrace their battles and their wars, right? But then you don't have Gondor falling in the same way, not nearly as catastrophically, of course, as Angmar fell, obviously. But you've got, the loss of the king and everything else over time and whatever. But you have the assimilation of the Númenórean culture with the indigenous culture and the decline of. So I'm sure, in few of the Angmarim. Nowadays, does the blood of old Angmar still run true? I'm sure.
Man, it's like the Angles.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I like it. I never thought of that parallel before, but it works. It works.
Or
it's
the
really
Poles.
interesting.
This is Poland. Well, come on in. If you invaded us, you'd be home by now.
Yeah, cool. So, all right. Sorry, we're not making much progress toward Gularan here, but
yeah.
But this is an interesting theory. This works. Okay, wait. How do we get up there? I have a hard time navigating in this area.
It's a big circle, so eventually it'll come to something.
Yeah. Who's this? Oh, it's a warg. Okay.
Pretty beat up looking warg.
Yeah. Okay, an orc banner, presumably.
Yeah.
What an interesting hand. Like with the fingers. Look, the articulation of the fingers is really interesting.
Yeah.
It's not just claws, right? It looks like. How would you describe the relationship between the hand and the crown?
It looks like it's reaching for it, but it isn't touching it.
Like it's reaching for it? Like it's almost like it's upholding it, but not quite.
Yeah.
The fingers are too reachy, right? For it to be upholding.
As a professional artist, I have to say, hands are freaking hard.
Yeah, I can.
This guy was
that.
skilled.
Yeah.
Whoever they got a skilled artist to do.
I mean, especially the way that the pinky goes differently from the other fingers, that's kind of good.
Yeah.
And the way, even that kind of shading with which the wrist breaks off there, instead of just having it be two lines or having it be that
does make it look like a severed hand, though.
Well, a little bit, a very roughly severed hand, but that's of course not a terrible thing, I suppose, on an orc banner. But yeah, I'm just trying to understand, because presumably the hand represents the orcs themselves, right? So we've got the crown. And I love the way, and this, of course, is not unique to this banner, but I love the way that the eye and the crown are kind of combined, iconographically, right, into the one symbol there, how the bottom of it looks like the eye, but the top of it looks like the crown. And I think that's really cool. But the hand, of course, notice how much more detail. I mean, look at the eye and the crown is a very flat two-dimensional icon, right? Mm-hmm. But the hand is a very three-dimensionally rendered object in that image.
Yep.
the hand has this significant depth that the eye/crown does not have. It's clear that the hand is what's being identified with the orcs whose banner this is, right? Does that seem fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The artist was very clear, though, to make sure that no part of the hand was touching the crown, though.
Exactly.
That was deliberate.
Yeah, clearly.
They're upholding the crown, but they don't get to approach it.
And yet, I can't help but feel that it's vaguely threatening. You know, like
the hand's going to take over the crown.
Yeah, like it's. I mean, look how much bigger the hand is for one thing.
It's such a delicate hand, though. It doesn't look like a big, rough,
There's no
orcish
claws
paw.
at all. Yeah, it really. I mean, it's not like it looks manicured or something, but I agree.
It looks more human.
I don't go so far as gentle hand, but it's certainly not a clawed fist.
Yeah, I'd say it's human. This is a human hand, not an orc.
You think it's a human hand?
I definitely think it's a human hand. Let's get a look at some of these orcs and get a look. Let's see.
All right.
Excuse me, sir. Hand inspector. No, this guy kind of has a humanish hand, but he's the archer guy. He's just has the artisan hand here. But
yeah,
this guy,
he's look nothing like.
Nah, this is a big
claws,
and that's
of this guy. Besides which, although that guy might very, very cunningly conceal an artistic temperament beneath that frame and behind that face, it would seem really unlikely.
Yeah. Well, we've seen their handiwork before. It's like, it's usually pretty slovenly and not at all. There's no care in it. It's covered in stains and drips. And
yeah, quite a bit. See, now
their hands are usually just handprints, actually, from what we've seen.
Yes, exactly. And I don't remember anything like that. That again, like the 3D rendering on that hand is really good, as you pointed out. Mm-hmm. Now, this is very interesting. We've seen this before, I feel sure.
Not with the spikes on the cauldron.
That's what I was wondering. Have we seen the pot crown here?
Kind of renders it kind of useless. You can't really turn it over now, can you?
You can't. But is this meant to be?
How many spikes on that?
A cook fire made symbolic?
1, 2, 3,
So,
5, 6, 7, 8. I'm seeing 8 again, just like around at around Gularan. There's 8 spires around Barad Gularan as well.
Okay. Oh, and there are 8 spires around the cauldron?
Yeah.
So it's a local shrine then, meant to replicate the tower itself?
Maybe. I don't know enough about Barad Gularan to know it before, though. Except
now,
there's teeth on the bottom of the iron trough at the bottom.
Right.
It's like a big mouth.
It is like a big mouth, with the spears then on the side being like tusks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Wonder if this is in tribute to the Witch King instead of Sauron.
Right, so then the cauldron is like the crown atop the head, and you've got the single eye in the middle.
Uh-huh. The big mouth to devour you all.
Right, and then the mouth of flame, right? Like it's like the gaping mouth of flame.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so look at that. So even this shrine is then kind of abstract.
Yeah.
And if Amalia is correct, as she's pointing out that if it's a forge, which seems likely,
or it used to be,
right, then a forge turned shrine is even more apt, as it were, for Sauron. Right now, Sikwayetska on the Twitch chat was saying that the hand is probably the white hand of Saruman, which is why it looks like a delicate human hand instead of an orc claw.
Let's see. We killed all the orcs. What are they called? Oh, they say they're White Hand. There we go. White Hand
Yeah,
Archer, White
orcs.
Hand Warmonger. So these are the White Hand is Sauron then. There we go.
But that still, to me, doesn't make it any less unusual. Like, we've not seen that in other Saruman
In other
orc
White Hand.
decorations. Yeah, I mean
It wasn't like this in Farnost?
no, I don't remember seeing anything like that. I mean, if it is meant to be, if it is an orc banner done by White Hand orcs, it would explain why they didn't make the hand look like a claw.
Yeah, aspiring to their human creator.
Right, but it certainly shows a fairly impressive degree of insight into Saruman grasping for the eye and crown.
It sounds like Saruman commissioned them so he wouldn't look bad, but I don't know.
I don't know, but it's also pretty open. I mean, open in competition to the... I mean, it certainly would explain why the White Hand is both simultaneously like upholding the eye and grasping at the eye, right? I mean, it works, totally works if it's Saruman, but...
That's subconscious right there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just kind of coming through, right? Shining through his true intentions. Interesting that the rest of this place is a complete dump. I mean, just like literally trash sitting around everywhere else.
Yeah. We have our beautiful shrine, and then we just got crap everywhere. It really just undermines their priorities. It's like must have our altar for sacrifices,
altar, which is not only nice but like interesting and with this like abstract sort of almost semi-allegorical construction, right?
Symmetrical, aesthetically pleasing, yeah.
Right, and
they're a
they're
complex
fascinating
bunch.
banners, and now over here we've got some white factories.
Oh,
with
yeah.
Aurochs? Heads?
Yeah, well, there were a lot of those outside of Angmar.
Yeah, Aurochs in plenty. And why this tent in the middle? Interesting.
To block our entry.
I guess so. And then, of course, we didn't even give a second glance to the big old...
Minas Cowl.
Yeah, the big old... No, I mean the statues.
Okay, yeah.
Even these have, trash fetched up against them.
It's like they care more about their ideas than any of the Angmar's ideas. These statues are junk. We'll make our own.
Exactly, right? Oh, yeah, look at the ancient, brooding evil statues. Let's start the junk pile right at their feet.
Yeah, I wonder if the orcs feel kind of intimidated by these as well, and they don't like them.
Yeah. Maybe. Though you'd think that they might show some deference. They might sort of express their deference. But maybe not.
Well, it really does show you where their priorities lie.
Right.
So, Minas Cowl. We know Minas means tower, right?
Yes.
So...
Yeah.
Cowl.
Actually, I was just about to go in, but actually I probably shouldn't go in. It's getting late. I'm trying to turn over a new leaf and end on time, instead of creeping later and later all the time.
Okay.
If I kept on the path that I was going, we'd be going until 1 a.m. every week, and I shouldn't do that.
It's summer vacation now. Time has no meaning.
Well, yeah. But anyway, are the ones are these the same banners over here?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, they are.
So if you watchers know of any instance where we might have seen these banners and overlooked them, please be sure to let us know before next week.
Agreed. I want to see, yes. If there's anywhere else we've seen the banners, I would like to know that.
I have a sneaking suspicion Farnost, but I'm not sure. It's been so long since we were out there.
Because I'm trying to figure out. So also this can be sort of homework for next week. If somebody can help me to remember, because I've done the Barad Gularan quests before, but It was years ago.
Mythgard Mondays, yeah.
It was years ago.
I remember doing those with you.
And and even then, when we did them in Mythgard Monday, I remember trying to like listen to the voiceover, and like I couldn't even read people's dialogue before people like were killed and stuff. So
yeah, everything just kept freezing because all the things came all at once.
yeah, exactly. That was tough. Anyway, so yeah, so for next week, I would like to try to remember what the story is here. Like, people were talking about how there were dour hands here. Like, well, okay, why are there dour hands here? How did they get here? What's going on with that? So I have vague memories, but I'm trying to recall more clearly because I would like to try to fit Barad Gularan a little bit more into the narrative of the region, especially as it has been evolving in our discussions here. So, okay.
I only remember trying to keep you alive. It's the only thing I remember.
Exactly. I was just trying to stay alive and get through it and say I was back. That was a long time ago.
This is the one where you jump in and go, what could go wrong? And I just go, ah.
Exactly. Those are fun days. All right, cool. All right, well, I'm going to let everybody go because it's getting late already. But we will pick up here next. We'll come back to Barad Gularan again next week and see what we can learn and discover circling around other parts of the towers, and see if folks can help me remember, remind me of the quest text and what's going on here at the tower. So we'll talk about that next week. Awesome. Thanks everybody for
Good night,
joining
everyone.
me, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for joining me on this epic exploration of The Lord of the Rings and of Standing Stone's video adaptation of Tolkien's story. If you are having even half the fun I'm having on this journey, I hope you will consider supporting the project by donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.